This time on Poll Hub, we're back in the States, Colorado, Texas, and New York, to be exact, and we're digging into the data to uncover a few surprises and maybe even some warning signs for a few of these candidates. So let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho.
And I'm Lee Maringoff.
We took a break to poll the nation a couple weeks back, and now we're back in the States with 4 weeks to go to Election Day, and we're in some big states, big important states, I should say, Colorado, Texas, and our own Empire State, New York. You might be saying, well, that's not a battleground state, but you might be surprised at how close some of the races are. We will get to that. Let's start out in Colorado, because that's a state where, in the Senate race, Republicans have been hoping that maybe they could pull off an upset there and unseat a two-term Democratic incumbent, Michael Bennet, in the Senate, and that would put them on the road to recapturing control of the Senate if they were to be able to flip a seat. What's it looking like there?
You know, the incumbent Bennet, Democrat, is up by 7 points. You know, he's doing very well among Democrats, not surprisingly. Gets 4 or 5% among Republicans, not surprising. He is splitting the independents pretty much, and I think that's helpful for him. And his favorability is a +8, and O'Day, the challenger, is upside down by 7 points and has a 38%. Geez, I don't know. Unsure, undecided. Bennet for two-term incumbent at 30.
Lee, just what that means is that 38% don't know who he is or are unsure what to make of him. I just want to make clear of that, right?
Okay, not even sure what I said, but if it needed clarity, I'm sure happy to have it. And Bennet, 31% for two-term incumbent, are unsure how to rate him, or maybe you haven't never heard of him. Did I get it right that time?
Yes.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Thank you. But anyway, so it's an interesting state. The intensity support is higher for the Democrat Bennet, so that puts him in good standing. But again, you know, you can't say this is a done deal. There's still, you know, single digits to single digits, and you know, it could be close. And I think it's going to be one of those states, given that the Republicans sort of are not jumping into New Hampshire at this point. They're worried about Pennsylvania. They're worried about Georgia, and somewhat worried about Ohio and Wisconsin. And after a while, you start saying, if you're the Republicans, where are we going to get a seat? If we're going to lose some, we got to pick up some. And one more than the Democrats do. So Colorado's a place that the Republicans, I think, are going to try to make a last stand in. And I think it could be very telling in terms of the Senate race. Right now, Democrat with an edge.
Well, also, I think what is probably getting some attention is that although Bennet has been in office for a while, and he does have that 7-point lead among registered voters, I think what's interesting about him is that his number is 48% among registered voters, 49% among those definitely who are going to vote. And so when you have an incumbent who's under 50%, that always attracts attention. That means there's some undecided voters that are sitting on the table, sitting it out right yet. And those are usually not people that end up going to an incumbent unless the turnout is very different. I think what is interesting about Colorado is that we do see, you know, similar enthusiasm for Democrats and Republicans. So I think that's something that is certainly a critical thing to watch.
One of the things about Colorado, and it's been true in every other state that we've looked at so far, is there's a governor's race at the same time. A couple of the states we've been in, Ohio in particular, and Georgia, the Republican incumbent, very, very popular and way out ahead of the Democrat. In this case, it's a Democrat incumbent, Jared Polis, and he's way out ahead of his Republican challenger. What should be worrying to Mike Bennet, though, the senator, is that 9% of the people that say they're voting for Jared Polis are voting for John O'Day, the Republican. So I think that adds to what you're talking about, Lee and Barb, with under 50%, is that Bennet, as a two-term senator, has some red flags, or at least yellow flags, that I imagine is the reason that this race is still on the map for both Republicans and Democrats as a must-win.
Yeah, and I would just add on that is that there's a lot of states we're seeing some significant split ticket voting. It's not enormous, but some of these are single digit races, and ticket splitting there can be very important. And that's something to watch. And also, to Barb's point, that 50% midfield stripe, a lot of these incumbents are having trouble with that, reaching that. So that makes it all very iffy for some of the states where even an incumbent has a slight advantage. They haven't closed the deal yet.
So there's another big governor's race in Texas. There's no Senate race there. This is the first state we've done where we only had one big race to look at. But who's running? Beto O'Rourke. You remember him? He was the guy that Democrats thought was going to save the day and turn Texas blue back in 2018, running against, was he running against Ted Cruz, right? And that didn't work out. He ran for president. That didn't work out. So is the third time a charm, Barb?
Doesn't look like it's so much. I mean, this is probably a closer race than the difference between Republicans and Democrats would lead us to think. Neither of these candidates, incumbent Abbott or Beto O'Rourke, are particularly popular in Texas. So with a partisan spread that gives the advantage of about 8 points in our poll, but it could be as much as 10, as low as 4 of Republican edge to Republicans in the state. Greg Abbott right now is ahead 49% to 45% for O'Rourke among registered voters statewide. But when we look at those voters who say that they will definitely vote, well, then that margin actually widens from 4 points to 8 points. And we've seen that pretty consistently around the country, where when we go from all registered voters to voters who say that they're more likely to turn out, Republicans generally are doing better. So this isn't a surprise in Texas. The only question mark, though, that I would put here is that again, we've seen this in other states, but the Democrats have generally had the enthusiasm for their candidates. So if you look at the difference between how much the supporters of each of these candidates, how much enthusiasm they have for them, O'Rourke supporters are much more strongly committed to their candidate than Abbott's. But Abbott's may actually show up at the polls.
Yeah, so that sort of offsets that enthusiasm advantage for the Democrat, is that the Republicans might actually be turning out more. And I think that's a very important note.
And the number, just so we get it, he's at 52. Abbott's at 52-44 with those definitely voting. So, I mean, Lee, that's an 8-point lead, and he's over 50. So that hits 2 benchmarks. But it's Texas. He's only got an 8-point lead. And independents are big for Abbott.
Yeah.
What happens?
Well, first of all, O'Rourke is getting about the same number of Republicans as Abbott is getting the Democrats, and O'Rourke is carrying the independents, as you note, by about 10 points. And that
same proportion, not necessarily the same number, because there are a lot more Republicans.
Well, so that's that's it. So the difference is, you get the same percentages, but the difference is the partisan advantage goes to the Republicans here. So even though the Democrat is holding his own with his base and he's carrying more independents, he trails. And I think that's important to note. And I thought also a couple other things in Texas while we're here. If I'm not mistaken, this is a state where the Democrats and Republicans are both pretty much equally confident in the fairness of the elections.
First time we've seen that in a state.
We haven't seen that anywhere else, which I think is kind of interesting. And the other point I would make on this, we ask about, George Bush's approval rating. George Bush, I'm thinking Texas. How about Joe Biden, the president? Okay.
I was wondering where you were going with that.
I was not going anywhere, Jay. I'm coming back. And so anyway, but with Mr. Biden, and one of the things I find really interesting in this is he's not particularly popular in the state. Not surprising. And the Republican congressional generic question is up over the Democrats by 4 points. And if you really strongly approve Biden, you're going to vote for the Democrat. If you strongly disapprove, you're going to vote for the Republican for Congress. If you just approve, you're still overwhelmingly voting for the Democrat. But here's the one I find really interesting. If you disapprove of the job Joe Biden is doing as president, you split evenly between voting for a Democrat and a Republican for Congress. So the notion that Joe Biden's approval rating, obviously the stronger he is, the better Democrats do. But you've got a lot of people who disapprove of him, and they still sort of break even in the congressional vote. So I think the story in Texas is one that's still to be told. Texas obviously has been on the map a lot lately. We will be watching that. I think it's the story still, in the remaining month. Turn out. See how
Well,
that goes.
the Democrats keep waiting. They keep waiting for Texas to
Yeah.
fall into their column, but I'm not so sure it's going to happen this time around.
And so then we get closer to home now, and New York. New York has an overwhelming greater number of Democrats than Republicans. The fact that this race could be a single-digit race between incumbent Kathy Hochul and the Republican challenger Lee Zeldin. Hochul's up by 10, but the race goes to 8 among those who say they'll definitely vote. I think that's got to be called a surprise. I don't know if it's an upset in the making in a very blue state where a lot of Democrats are really raring to go. But they outnumber Republicans. It's getting a little bit more competitive, and the crime issue seems to be playing Zeldin's way.
Yeah, and I think, Kathy Hochul, although she is the sitting governor, she was the lieutenant governor of Andrew Cuomo, who disappeared from office under
Disappeared from office. That's a good euphemism. I like that.
well, he didn't go willingly. And so I think that she's not particularly well known across the state. And she is from the upstate region, which in New York has traditionally been a more Republican area. She's not that well known in the suburbs surrounding New York City, where Zeldin calls Long Island home. And she's not that well known in New York City either. So she's looking to get support from, tried and true Democrats to just simply, click her lever. And I think that Zeldin is giving her a bit of a run. I think it still would be surprising since New York, again, has such a wide partisan difference. Democrats outnumbering Republicans almost 2-1 in the state. That's why they call it a Democratic and blue state. But I think it may be interesting. People are evaluating governors differently than they are races for Senate. So they are making a choice between those candidates.
And on that, Barb, the independents are in Zeldin's corner by 14 points. And I think that also helps him offset the Democratic advantage and makes it somewhat close.
That being said, she's over 50%, which we've talked about as being kind of an important thing.
Yeah.
That being said, I'll go back and forth a few times here. That being said, Republicans are at 88% saying they're definitely voting. Democrats are at 81%. New York City, 77%. And we all know in New York, Democrats got to win the city big because they're not going to win upstate. And she's not winning the suburbs. The suburbs are the place that people say they're definitely voting. So I think there's warning signs. And maybe this isn't 1994. Where Mario Cuomo was stunned and lost to George Pataki. There were more warning signs for Mario Cuomo in that race, certainly, than there are here. But there's a Senate race on the ballot. Chuck Schumer, who you may have heard of. He's, Senate Majority Leader.
Yes.
He's running against a guy who apparently nobody's heard of. Our poll suggests that because that's the biggest answer for him on his favorability is I've never heard of him, Joe Pinion. Schumer is up by
No, but
13.
just say the number, Jay. I mean, that was phenomenal.
What? Whether you support your candidate or not?
No. The Republican opinion. I mean, we haven't seen that kind of a candidate who 65% of New Yorkers said that they have either never heard of him or are unsure how to rate him. That's
and 62% of those definitely voting for him. Yeah, that's who? Where?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
So if you're going to vote for him, you're definitely convinced of that. But this is not what you call a mile wide.
Exactly. But my point there on Schumer is that he's up sizably, and Hochul doesn't get that. She's not getting that number. And in other states, we've seen the governors getting the number and not the senators. This is the flip side of that, I think, for all the reasons we've discussed. The other thing I just mentioned is that when we're looking at issues in New York, and we've seen this in other states where we've asked about things, crime is the number 3 issue in New York. And Lee, you hit on this. Lee Zeldin's running on a crime campaign, all about crime as an issue. We've asked about that, and inflation, preserving democracy are number 1 and 2, like they have in every other state they have been. But abortion's been number 3 in every other state, and it is in 4th place here. And crime is number 3. And that, I think, is telling. I think this is a closer race than almost anybody's giving it credit for being. That being said, she's got all the money in the world and she's flooding the thing with ads. It's just turnout. Do Democrats turn out? All they have to do is turn out. All I got to do is go vote and she wins.
Well, one other interesting point, though, too, that we have seen in most other states is that the Democrats have had the enthusiasm for their candidates, and the Republicans have been looking like they're the folks that are going to show up at the polls. In New York, I think it's very interesting that Hochul's supporters are not as firmly committed. 62% of her supporters say that they're firmly committed to her, but 74% of Zeldin supporters say that they're strongly committed to him.
Yeah, and I think, look, she's the incumbent, but she was not elected, as you alluded to. And so she has some of the resources and advantage of incumbency, but she's, having run on a ticket for lieutenant governor. That's not exactly having run statewide. And I thought it was surprising she wasn't doing better upstate, where clearly she's more identified as having been an upstater. If you're not going to do as well in the New York City suburbs, you better make up the difference upstate. And I'll say one other thing on this before we go. On the crime issue, if you think crime is the number 1 issue, by 20 points, you're voting more Republican for Congress than you are for Democratic. So if you are sitting home and watching TV and those ads are coming out and it's Lee Zeldin talking about crime, this is like an issue that the Republicans are turning to. They don't think inflation ultimately is the winner. They think crime may be stronger down the road. And I suspect we're going to hear a lot more around the country, but in New York as well, about the issue of crime.
That'll do it for this edition of Poll Hub.
Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review. Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions for us, tweet them directly to @MaristPoll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it will cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as we release it.
We'll see you next time.